10-minute murder.
The promise of fame and the opportunity to have your picture seen by thousands of people. Reinaldo Rivera looked for young women that he thought would be excited by the chance to become a model. He would approach them and see if they were interested in taking photos for him to pass on to modeling agencies and escort services. The only true part about his story was that their picture would make it to the news, only it would not be for the reasons he promised. Reinaldo Rivera was born in September of 1963 in Madrid, Spain. His father was a doctor. When Reinaldo was 7, the family moved to Puerto Rico. When he was 19, he joined the Navy, and he served in the Navy for a decade before his discharge. And during that time, he was in a pilot training program. He became a lieutenant junior grade and lived in Texas, Florida, California, and North Carolina. From 1986 to 1991, he worked for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C. He eventually pursued a degree at the University of South Carolina and settled in North Augusta. On February 14, 1993, he married Tammy Bonnet. They had 2 children together, and in 1998, Rivera started working at the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company as a tire inspector. North Augusta is in South Carolina, and right up the road from Augusta, Georgia. Both cities are classified as part of the Central Savannah River Area, or the CSRA. The CSRA includes several counties between the 2 states, so in July of 1999, when 17-year-old Melissa Dingus went missing, it was on the news in all of the surrounding cities. She was from Graniteville, South Carolina, and there was no trace of what happened to her. Then in December of that year, 17-year-old Tiffany Wilson went missing. Only she wasn't alone. She had her 2-month-old daughter with her. She planned on getting pictures with Santa that day. Her car was found in a Winn-Dixie grocery store parking lot in North Augusta. Witnesses said that she entered a mid-1980s white 4-door Ford. They said the car stopped and the driver seemed to be talking with Tiffany, then it sped away, apparently with her inside. 3 days later, her baby was found alive in her carrier outside of a Georgia Welcome Center on the other side of the river in Augusta. A search was conducted up and down I-20 looking for the missing mother. They did find some clothes, but not Tiffany. On December 30th, 2 hunters stumbled upon the body of a young female while hunting in a wooded area in Graniteville. The medical examiner confirmed that her hands were tied behind her back and she had been stabbed and raped. Fingerprints confirmed it was Tiffany Wilson. Were both women taken by the same person? That's the question investigators needed to answer. For 6 months, there weren't any missing girls reported, but the nightmare was not over. In June of 2000, 18-year-old Tabitha Bosdell from Augusta, Georgia, disappeared. Her family dropped her off at a huddle house so she could go inside and apply for a job when she went missing. In September, it was reported that 21-year-old Sergeant Marnie Gilsta, a soldier stationed at Fort Eisenhower, at the time called Fort Gordon, had barely survived an attack and sustained serious injuries. Upon investigation, they knew that their case was related to the missing girls. She was hospitalized, but died 5 days later. Georgia and South Carolina worked together since the victims were from both states and had also been moved across state lines. In October, 18-year-old Chrisley Barton was also attacked in her home. The perpetrator left her to die, but she was alert enough to call for help. After receiving medical attention, she was able to give the investigators details that they needed. She was approached by a man in the parking lot at a huddle house in North Augusta. He told her he owned an escort agency and he was a modeling agent. He wanted to take some photos of her and see if he could help her get some work. Chrisley thought that it seemed to be a pretty good opportunity, so she invited him back to her house to take those photos. Although once they got to her house, she was raped. She was also stabbed in the throat 3 times with a knife from her own kitchen. She was able to tell the investigators what he looked like and what he drove. His car was located outside of the Rainbow Terrace Motel in Clearwater, South Carolina. He didn't answer the door to the motel when the police announced that they were there. When they entered the room, they found him inside slashing his wrists in an attempt to commit suicide. The arresting officers prevented him from doing any further damage to himself and brought him to the Medical College of Georgia, where he was put in an isolated cell under suicide watch. He eventually told them where to find the bodies of Tabitha Bosdell and Melissa Dingus. Rivera's wife wrote a letter that was published in the Augusta Journal. She expressed her faith in God and grief over the deaths. She wrote that she had been praying for the person responsible to be apprehended, but had no idea that that person would be her own husband. After Rivera's picture was shown on the local news, investigators got over 30 calls from other women that had been approached by Rivera from 1999 to 2000. All of the stories were the same. He complimented their appearance, mentioned that he could get them help into modeling, and tried to continue conversations. He even followed some of them not only around stores, but out to their cars. They were mostly young women with blonde hair. The charges against him were so confusing with many counties involved. Richmond County could only charge him for the crimes that happened in their district, so they could not include all the murders. On November 3rd, Rivera was charged with capital murder and 13 other charges, including rape, aggravated assault, aggravated sodomy, burglary, and possession of a knife during a commission of a crime. It included the crimes against Glista and Barton, and they intended to seek the death penalty. When the prosecution seeks the death penalty in the state of Georgia, the trial happens in 2 phases. The first part is to decide whether the defendant is innocent or guilty. If convicted, they move on to the penalty phase. The penalty phase once again includes opening and closing statements and the opportunity to present evidence. The jury may decide life in prison with or without parole or death, but the jury must be unanimous on their decision. In the first part of the trial, Rivera was found guilty on all counts beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense had pleaded that if he was found guilty, he should also be found mentally ill, but the jury rejected that idea. And during the penalty phase, Rivera was allowed to address the court. He called the process a joke. He called the district attorney a liar. He said he was a sex addict that had managed to live a double life. He even suggested that maybe it was some kind of mental illness and that his ailment should be studied. Maybe he could even help find a cure, like he's got osteoporosis or something and not a cold-blooded murderer. He went on to admit that he fantasized about the attacks, the rapes, and how he killed the girls. Rivera actually warned the jury that if released, he would do it again. After all, he claimed it was an addiction. Finally, he asked them to give him the death penalty, and they did. Not only did they sentence him to death for murder, they also added 7 life sentences plus 105 years for all of the other charges. When he was given the death penalty, he was automatically able to appeal the case. In 2006, he denied the appeals process. Rivera has been sitting on death row at a prison in Georgia since then. But in 2016, Rivera shocked the country when he claimed that he was actually innocent. He said he falsely confessed to all the crimes. The families of the victims were outraged, and the communities were kind of shocked by the claims, but not completely shocked. Rivera had not only confessed to the crimes, but he led the police to where they could find the missing bodies. And in closing statements at his trial, he said that if given the chance, he would do it again. The fear felt by those that could have easily become one of his victims was felt all over again. The idea of running into Rivera in public, knowing what his intentions had been, was terrifying. The court, however, found no merit in this new statement. The court did say that they would allow the lawyers to show any errors that they felt occurred during the trial. The defense said that the trial was brutal. They were not only in court against the prosecution and trying to persuade jurors, but they were constantly arguing with Rivera about what to say and what not to say. But they did not seek a new trial. There was also a debate about whether or not a man could really start such a horrific behavior in his mid-30s. It's not really your typical midlife crisis kind of activity. Had he been attacking women long before it was noticed? Some of the other places that he'd lived started researching cold cases to see if he could be connected to any of those unsolved crimes. Reinaldo Rivera did not make any of his victims models, but their pictures were seen by thousands of people. They were beautiful young women with bright smiles and a promising life ahead of them. Whether they were already mothers, serving in the military, or just starting to think about their future, they certainly did not plan to die so young. Their families were robbed of years that they should have had together. Sometimes when things seem too good to be true, they are. And sometimes when a strange man says that he has a life-changing opportunity for you, stay alive and run the other way. Whoa. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and I really appreciate you listening. If you're new to 10-Minute Murder, welcome, settle in, make yourself comfortable, and please subscribe now so that you can more easily catch up on all the back episodes. Connect on social media, see the pictures of what we talk about here in the podcast. And if you like this episode, if you like this podcast, leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or any place that's possible, because your positive feedback is appreciated and it helps this show grow more and more. Go to 10minutemurder.com for all things related to 10-Minute Murder. Quickly to an email. Hi, Joe. Love your show. Thank you for doing what you do in a more tactful way than some. And then she goes on to describe an interesting story she wants me to cover. And for my question, I just always wondered what you edit out of your podcasts. If there's the ums and the hms and coughs or whatever. We're all human and probably want our best selves displayed, especially as a podcaster. I was wondering if you could do a raw and uncut version, even if it's a bit longer. I'm sure people would find it entertaining. Just a thought. Well, happy holidays to you and yours. Hugs, April. Thank you for your email, April. You didn't leave a country name, city name, state name, or anything, so I have no idea where you're from. But I do appreciate you sending the email, taking the time to do that. And yeah, I edit a lot out of this podcast. Mostly it's mistakes. The coughs and the sneezes, taking a drink of my drink, all of that I edit out as well. Also, I say names wrong pretty often. If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know that I struggle with names for literally no reason. Like that should be something that I get pretty easily. Like for instance, in this episode today, Reinaldo Rivera, I said Reinaldo Rivera at least a half a dozen times. So that is going to be one of the things that I go, you'll never hear it because I'm going to go back and edit that part out. But I called this man Reinaldo at least 6 times. There are also times when I'll go off on a tangent about how the police are handling a case. I'll go off about the murderer themselves. And then there are times when I'll go really deep into a certain part of the story. And then later on, I'll realize, first of all, this isn't 15-minute murder, so I need to cut some stuff out. And the stuff that I went into big detail about doesn't really add to the story, so I'll cut that out. And then occasionally, I'll say something kind of funny during a podcast episode. And later on, listening back to it, I'll decide, that's probably not a good place for me to be funny. Or it wasn't the best joke to begin with. So I'll cut that out, and you never hear that. What I do in episode unedited. But for the reasons I just listed, that's going to be a no from me, dog. It would make me so uncomfortable to put out an episode where I had tons of screw-ups and things like that in it. So I don't think I'll do that. However, the closest I could come to doing it is if I did Facebook Live or Instagram Live, and I just did an episode on live, and I recorded it and went back and edited it for release on my regular podcast. But if you were watching the live, you would see it in real time where I'm making all the mistakes and doing all the things. That could be a possibility, but I don't know. Maybe. That's a strong maybe. Okay, thanks for listening to another 10-Minute Murder podcast episode. I'll see you soon on the next one. Bye. Ka-chow.